February 1943, the North African desert, Tunisia. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox, writes in his diary after the Battle of the Kasserine Pass. His words would surprise many. The enemy's tactical defense was first class. They recovered very quickly from the initial shock and soon succeeded in stopping our advance. This was about the same Americans whom his troops had crushed just days earlier. The same ones German soldiers called soft and inexperienced. The ones considered easy prey. But something had changed. Today we will uncover a story that is rarely told. Not the American version of events, but the German one. What did German commanders and soldiers really think about American troops? How did their opinion change from contempt to respect? And why did even Rommel ultimately admit that he had underestimated his opponent? This is a story about how an army learns to fight, and how enemies learn to respect one another. But before we begin, like the video and subscribe, it truly helps. And now into the battle. Let's start at the very beginning. What did the Germans think about the Americans even before meeting them on the battlefield? There was a stereotype deeply ingrained in German military thinking. From a German report in 1917, after the First World War, the prevailing opinion in Germany before your entry into the war was this: America, a nation of money hunters, too absorbed in the pursuit of the dollar to create a strong military force. 25 years passed. The stereotype remained. By 1942, German soldiers were convinced Americans were weak, spoiled, unprepared for the harsh realities of European warfare. The Wehrmacht was fighting on two fronts, against the Russians in the east and against the British in Africa and Europe. German soldiers were hardened by years of war. They considered themselves professionals, the best warriors in the world, and the Americans, newcomers, inexperienced conscripts who had never seen real combat. But there was another view, less common but prophetic. The same 1917 report continued. But since your troops entered the fighting, opinions have changed. And although Germany is now a defeated nation, it believes that they would have won a war against any nation in the world except the United States. Some German officers remembered these words. Most did not. November 1942. Operation Torch. American and British forces land in North Africa, Algiers, Oran, Casablanca. Resistance from Vichy French forces is minimal. Many surrender almost without a fight. American soldiers feel confident. Their first baptism of fire was easy. Maybe this war wouldn't be so hard after all. The Germans observe and draw conclusions. The wrong conclusions. Colonel General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim, commander of the 5th Panzer Army in Tunisia, studies intelligence reports. The Americans are poorly organized. Their command is chaotic. Their forces are scattered. He plans a lesson, a brutal lesson. February 14, 1943, Sidi Bou Zid, two veteran German panzer divisions, the 10th and 21st attack American positions. The U.S. 1st Armored Division holds the line. German tactics are flawless. They bypass American strong points on isolated hills. They encircle them, cut them off. American counterattacks run straight into well-camouflaged 88mm anti-tank guns. The result is catastrophic. One American soldier recalled, "It was a slaughter. They drove straight into the muzzles of camouflaged 88s, and all I could do was stand there and watch tank after tank explode or burst into flames." By February 16th, the U.S. Second Corps had lost 1,600 men, nearly 100 tanks, 57 armored vehicles, and 29 artillery pieces. The Germans rejoice. Their prejudices are confirmed. The Americans, weak, incompetent, easy prey. But this was only the first chapter. February 19th, 1943. Kasserine Pass. Rommel sees an opportunity. The Americans are demoralized, retreating. It is the perfect moment to deliver a decisive blow. German tanks and infantry attack the pass. The American defense appears chaotic. The troops have arrived recently. Many have not even completed basic training. Some received bazookas just 2 days before the battle and were learning how to use them while under German attack. The Americans retreat 50 miles. Panic spreads. One soldier later admitted, "We simply lost our heads." German commanders exchanged smug glances. Just as expected, the Americans cannot really fight. But then something changes. February 22nd, the Americans regroup. British reinforcements arrive, and then American artillery opens fire. Massed, accurate, devastating. This is not what the Germans expected. Rommel would later write the words quoted earlier. The enemy's tactical defense was first class. They recovered very quickly from the initial shock. February 23rd. A massive American airstrike hits the Kasserine Pass. Rommel orders a withdrawal. By February 24th, the pass is back in Allied hands. Strategically, Kasserine changed nothing. The Germans would still lose North Africa. It was only a matter of time. But psychologically, it changed everything. The Americans realized they were not ready. That war was not what they had imagined. That the Germans were professionals, deadly professionals. General Lloyd Fredendall was dismissed. George Patton took his place. Reforms began, harsh, painful, and necessary. And the Germans? They learned something too. After Kasserine, German officers began to reassess their judgments. Yes, the Americans had lost. Yes, their casualties were heavy. But something in their behavior gave pause. A German veteran later recalled the Americans as enthusiastic amateurs with a tendency toward aggression that I had never seen in any other nation. What did he mean? The British, he explained, were competent and professional but cautious. They attacked only with overwhelming superiority. They were methodical. The Russians, brutal and relentless, capable of enduring unbelievable suffering, but predictable in their tactics. And the Americans? Different. If something attacked them, the Allies immediately returned fire and maneuvered to a more advantageous position. The Americans immediately opened fire, unleashed a punishing rain of artillery or airstrikes on whatever they were fighting, and went over to the counterattack as soon as the rain of death ended. It was a different military culture, a different approach to combat. A German infantryman or tank crewman might be more individually skilled. But the Americans compensated with sheer, naked, unapologetic combat aggressiveness and firepower, incredible firepower. Here it is important to understand the fundamental difference in military philosophy. The German army was built around the concept of Auftragstaktik, mission-type tactics. Junior officers and NCOs were given an objective and allowed to decide how to achieve it. This created flexibility, initiative, and rapid decision-making. German soldiers trained for years. The officer corps was professional. Non-commissioned officers, the backbone of the army, were experienced veterans. Blitzkrieg, their signature doctrine, relied on speed, coordination between tanks and infantry, and decisive engagements. Mobility and strategic initiative were key. The American army was different. It relied on massed firepower, artillery, aviation, tanks, all at once. German soldiers found this style of warfare frustrating, even unfair. Many Germans believed the Americans avoided direct combat. Instead, they relied on overwhelming firepower to crush the enemy before ever stepping onto the battlefield. This clashed with the traditional German military ethos, which valued direct confrontation and personal bravery. Some Germans viewed American tactics as a form of cheating, an impersonal, mechanical way of making war. But you know what? It worked. A German officer wrote in a post-Kasserine report, "British experience was usefully applied in American technique." He was referring to the M3 half-track armored personnel carrier. The Germans were so impressed that after the battle, German units used large numbers of captured American half-tracks. It was an acknowledgement. Reluctant, but an acknowledgement nonetheless. May 1943. Tunisia falls. 275,000 German and Italian soldiers are taken prisoner, more than at Stalingrad. Von Arnim is among the captives. Rommel has already flown back to Europe. The American army has learned, quickly, painfully, but it has learned. Patton and Bradley enter the war. The lessons of Kasserine are absorbed: training, command, air support, logistics, how to fight a multinational war. But Kasserine leaves a bitter aftertaste that poisons Allied relations until the end of the war. The British become convinced that the Americans are infant soldiers, soft, spoiled amateurs who require gentle but firm guidance from their wiser, more experienced English cousins. Montgomery and Alexander conclude that the Americans are hopelessly trained and led, poor soldiers who are unlikely to improve quickly. They are wrong, catastrophically wrong. June 6, 1944. The Normandy landings. American soldiers assault Omaha Beach, the bloodiest of all the invasion beaches. The veteran German 352nd Infantry Division is dug in on the heights. The first waves of Americans are cut down. Machine gun fire mows men down on the sand. Bodies float in the surf. German commanders watch. They are convinced the invasion will fail. But the Americans do not retreat. They keep coming, wave after wave, supported by naval gunfire that turns German positions into a lunar landscape. By the end of the day, the beachhead is secured, at the cost of 2,400 American lives on Omaha alone. German soldiers taken prisoner later admit they did not expect such persistence. Here it is important to understand the evolution of German perception. 1942 to 43. Contempt. Americans are weak and inexperienced. 1943, after Kasserine. Cautious reassessment. They learn quickly. 1944. Normandy and beyond. Respect mixed with frustration. Frustration at what? A German soldier explained, "It seemed to us that the Americans avoided direct combat, relying on overwhelming firepower." The idea of softening up the enemy before battle ran counter to deeply rooted German military traditions, which emphasized strength and decisive action. The Wehrmacht was trained to fight through bold offensives and aggressive tactics. The slow, methodical nature of American operations therefore felt alien to them. But there was another side, the psychological impact. Many German soldiers reported a sense of helplessness when caught under prolonged bombardment. They knew that any attempt to move or regroup would bring further devastation. Moreover, reliance on superior logistics and firepower, rather than frontal assaults, reinforced the perception that the Americans were fighting a war of attrition rather than a contest of martial skill. German officers in particular struggled to adapt to this reality. Their own training and doctrine were built around aggressive offensive action, not defensive endurance. But here lies the paradox. Despite their frustration, many German soldiers came to respect the Americans for their military effectiveness and ingenuity. Although they might initially dismiss their enemies as inexperienced or lacking tactical finesse, it became clear over time that the American approach to war was highly effective. From a report on German prisoners of war recorded by British intelligence, although he did not consider the American infantrymen or tank crewmen to be particularly skillful compared to British or German counterparts, they more than compensated for this with sheer, naked, unapologetic combat aggressiveness. This is the key point. Not skill, aggressiveness. The German soldier continued. When other allies were attacked, they immediately returned fire and maneuvered to a more advantageous position. The Americans immediately returned fire, unleashed a punishing rain of artillery or airstrikes, and went over to a counterattack as soon as the fire lifted. Counterattack, not defense, counterattack. This was the cultural difference. American military culture emphasized initiative, aggression, and seizing the initiative. Summer 1944, the battle for France, American forces pushed through Normandy, slowly, bloodily, but relentlessly. German commanders begin to grasp the scale of the problem. This is not just numerical superiority, it is industrial power. America is producing tanks, aircraft, and artillery in quantities Germany cannot match. Every lost German tank is an irreplaceable loss. Every lost American tank is replaced by 2 new ones within a week. A captured German officer tells British interrogators, "We were not fighting an army, we were fighting a factory." And here is an important nuance. Research by Trevor Dupuy revealed a shocking statistic. On an individual basis, German ground soldiers consistently inflicted casualties approximately 50% higher than those they received from opposing British and American forces under all circumstances. This was true when they were attacking, and when they were defending, when they had local numerical superiority and when they did not, when they were winning and when they were losing. Individually, the German soldier was better trained and more effective. But the Americans and the British were able to maintain a far more consistent level of troop quality, full mechanization, superior logistics, and, critically, they could afford losses. Germany could not. December 1944, the Ardennes Offensive, the last major German offensive in the West. Hitler commits his final reserves in a desperate attempt to split the Allies. Initially, the Germans achieve success. American units are caught by surprise. Some formations are surrounded. German commanders hope to repeat Kasserine, crush the Americans, capture fuel depots, divide the Allies. But this is not 1943, and these are not the same Americans. American forces hold. The 101st Airborne Division is surrounded at Bastogne. The Germans demand surrender. General McAuliffe replies with a single word: nuts! The German emissary is confused. This is not the response they expected from the soft Americans. The Americans hold. Patton's army breaks through. The German offensive is stopped. By the end of January 1945, the Germans are pushed back. Their losses are irreplaceable. Their last armored reserves are destroyed. A German officer later admits, "We hoped the Americans would panic like they did in 1943. Instead, they fought better than we did." The final months of the war. 1945. American and German forces meet in the heart of Germany. By this point, the German army is a shadow of its former self. Veterans are dead or captured. They are replaced by teenagers and old men. American troops enter German cities, and something curious happens. German civilians are surprised. From reports by American soldiers, the Germans showed no outward signs of hatred toward the victors. One American private admitted, "It's hard not to smile back at them." German civilians expected brutality, revenge, what German propaganda had promised them. Instead, they encountered soldiers who handed out chocolate to children, who treated prisoners correctly, who did not seek revenge. From post-war testimony by German civilians, "We were told that your people were inclined to be rough, and we had the impression that very hard times awaited us. But today, after living with them for 24 hours, we no longer have any fears." They are astonishingly gentle people, and a great contrast to the authoritarian manner of our own soldiers. Your troops, not a single one of them, said an unpleasant word to anyone, and when we offered them firewood for cooking and heating, they accepted it with what seemed like a certain shyness. This was a complete reversal of the 1942 stereotype. The Americans were not soft. They were human. There is a difference. So, in the end, what did German soldiers think of the Americans? A complex question, a complex answer. At the beginning of the war, contempt, based on stereotypes and cultural prejudice. After the first encounters, shock at how quickly the Americans learned and adapted. Mid-war, frustration with American tactics, but growing respect for their effectiveness. End of the war, full recognition that they were facing a powerful, well-supplied, aggressive military force. A German veteran said after the war, "We were not afraid of the American soldiers as such. We were afraid of what they represented. America's unlimited resources, their ability to produce thousands of tanks, aircraft, and guns. Their soldiers who came wave after wave while our best men were dying. It was a war of attrition, and Germany lost it. Not because the German soldier was worse. Individually, he was better trained and more experienced. But war is not a duel between individual soldiers. It is a clash of systems, of industry, of logistics, of will. And in that, the Americans surpassed everyone. There is another aspect that is often forgotten: the relationship between officers and enlisted men. From a German report in 1918, American troops lack the smartness and precision of German soldiers, but the cordial relations between officers and men more than compensate for the absence of iron discipline. The attitude of the American officer toward enlisted men differs greatly from our army, in which officers have always treated their men like cattle. This was a cultural difference. In the Wehrmacht, discipline was harsh. Officers kept their distance. Hierarchy was rigid. In the American army, officers could joke with enlisted men. Distance existed, but it was smaller, more human. Some German officers saw this as weakness, a lack of discipline. But in practice, it created more cohesive units. Soldiers did not fight out of fear of punishment. They fought for their comrades, for officers they respected rather than feared. An American platoon commander could sit with his men, share a cigarette, listen to their problems. In the German army, this was unthinkable, and it worked, in its own way. The American way. One final paradox. German soldiers captured by the Americans often preferred this captivity to being captured by the Russians, for obvious reasons. But there was something else as well. Surprise at how they were treated. A German POW recalled, "The Americans gave us food, cigarettes, they treated our wounds. One American soldier showed me a photograph of his family. He said he hoped the war would end soon so he could go home." For a German soldier raised in a culture where the enemy was absolute evil, this was a revelation. The Americans did not hate the Germans. They wanted to defeat Germany, but not to destroy the German people. This is a subtle but important distinction. Of course, there were exceptions. Atrocities occurred on both sides. War makes people cruel. But overall, American soldiers surprised Germans with their humanity. And German soldiers, despite all the propaganda about racial superiority, ultimately admitted the Americans were worthy opponents. May 1945. The war in Europe ends. Millions of German soldiers are in captivity. Cities are destroyed. The Third Reich is dead. American troops stand on German soil. Victors. What did they prove? That an army does not have to be the most individually skillful to win. It has to be the most effective system, the most adaptive, the most persistent. The Americans entered the war inexperienced, underestimated, despised. They left the war as professionals, respected, victorious. The history of German perceptions of American soldiers is a story of false assumptions, of stereotypes shattered by reality. The Germans thought Americans were weak and found determination. They thought Americans were cowardly and encountered aggression. They thought Americans could not fight and faced a military machine that did not stop, no matter what. A German officer interrogated in 1945 said words that sum it all up. In 1942, we laughed at the idea of an American army. In 1943, we began to worry. In 1944, we were afraid. And in 1945, we knew we had lost. This is the evolution from contempt to fear to acceptance, and an important lesson of history. Never underestimate your enemy, because the opponent you despise today may become the force that defeats you tomorrow. The Americans proved this, on battlefields from North Africa to the heart of Germany. They began as underestimated newcomers. They ended as an unstoppable force. If you found this material interesting, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Write in the comments, what surprised you most about the German perception of American soldiers? History is not just facts. It is an understanding of how people on different sides of the front saw one another, how enemies learned to respect their opponents. And when we understand both perspectives, we gain a fuller picture of what really happened. Thank you for watching. Until we meet again in history.